Hi, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and today we have an exciting tutorial for you where we're going to be showing you how to do inline filters with a table. So it's going to be a great training and I'm looking forward to showing you. Thank you so much. Alrighty, great. Let's get started on the table header filter. And what we have here is we have just a basic 15 row table here. And I've created basically multiple columns, and we want to be able to sort in these columns by either name, appointment date, or address. And I'll go ahead and unhide row 6, but that'll come in handy a little bit later on. Okay, so let's get started. And the idea is that if a user enters a name here or a partial name, we want it to filter by that name. And then what we're going to use, we've basically separated appointment date into two columns so that we can not only separate a from date but a to date, so that we can give it a range, and as well as address. Okay, and most of that work is going to be through VBA, but I will go ahead and walk you through it right now. And we also want to enter some sort of a text so that users know what they should be doing in these fields. So for example, if we enter name here, we want the user to know that they should enter a name here, but we want that to look different. When we see enter name, we want it to look different than they would if they entered any ordinary text. And we can do that through conditional formatting. So if the words enter name are entered here, let's go ahead and add conditional formatting onto that. So all we have to do is go into conditional formatting, click new rule, and then we can go ahead and click a format cells based that contain, and the cell value would be equal to enter name. Okay, so we'll go ahead and set the format on that, and let's format that a little bit different. We can go italic, and then we can set a color, let's say to this medium gray color, so that this way when we set enter name, it's italicized and light gray, but any other text is automatically black and regular. Okay, and we want to duplicate that for the others as well, although we're going to change the text. So we can do that simply with copy and paste. And we're going to paste special, and then we're going to paste the formats. Okay, and we can do that again, paste special, and we're doing it individually as opposed, because it'll provide a different conditional format to each one. So we do want to keep it separate and paste each one separately as opposed to doing all of them at once. And what that'll do is, and we'll go ahead and reset the rows here just simply by clicking format, and we'll go ahead and realign those since we've set them all individually. Okay, good. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and update the conditional formats for appointment date. Now I want this to say from date, and I want this to say to date, and this enter address, so that when that text is entered, it is also italicized and light gray. So we'll go ahead and edit this one, conditional formatting. We're going to manage rules because we've already got a rule from our copy. We've pasted this rule into this rule. So all we have to do is actually update the rule now. And we have to update the text, and we can change that from, we're going to change it to from date, and we'll do the same to the other three. So now we've got this from date, and because we've copied and pasted the rule from this one as well. So we'll go ahead and manage that rule, and we're going to update the text to date on this one as well, and then we'll do that with the last one on the address as well. So this way we don't have to keep re-entering the formats over and over again. We just have to update the condition in which those formats are changed. Okay, now that we've just about done our conditional formatting, we can go ahead and test it out. And okay, great. Let's go ahead and update that. Now that we have that set, we can see to make sure it's all working, all of it looks correct. And when we change it, it's tested. Okay, great. All right, now we're ready for the VBA portion. Alrighty, from the Developer tab, we'll want to go into Visual Basic. If you do not have this Developer tab visible, simply go into the File and go into Options, and you'll go into the customize ribbon, and then you'll see add-ins here, and you'll want to see developer here. You want to make sure that you go ahead and select that so that you can see it. You can also press Alt F11 to make the Visual Basic window open so that we can start creating our macro. And the first thing you want to do is we want to create a module. We can just right click anywhere, insert a module, and we'll want to go ahead and name that module. When you have a lot of modules, you want to name them independently, so it's always good practice, although in this case we'll just have one. Click on the properties window, and then we'll go ahead and name that module. We'll just call it filtering module. Okay, you want to make sure that the name that you give this filtering module is not the same as any macro. That'll create a conflict, so you want to keep those names separate. We'll go ahead and start entering a name for our macro, and we'll call that sub and table filter. Okay, and that'll give us the end sub. And what we want to do now is we want to define some of the names that we're going to be entering. And we have basically 4 different fields, okay, 2 date fields, and 1 name and 1 address. So let's go ahead and dim those or dimension those. We will do the contact name and the contact address both as strings. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Dim contact name and then comma contact address as string. Okay, because those are going to be strings. Strings are just the same as text. And then we have 2 date fields. We have a to date and a from date. So we're going to go ahead and dimension those as dates because we want to keep those as the date format. So we'll do that. And then from date as date. Okay. One other one we want to do is we want to filter this entire table. We need to know the last row of the table. As in our prior videos, we've always defined the last row. So we'll go ahead and dim the last row as long. Long means a whole number. Okay, so now that we've got that set, all the work we're going to be doing is in sheet 1. So let's go ahead and make sure that we reference sheet 1 so that we don't have to write it for each line. So we'll go ahead and say with sheet 1. Okay, now all of our macro, all of the coding that we're going to be doing will be within this statement, within this with and end with. Okay, and the first thing we want to do is we want to set our last row. What is the last row? In this case, we're going to use the column E. Okay, and we don't want to filter, we want to know the last row of the table that we're filtering. So we want to define that last row, and then we'll go ahead and set it. We can do that through VBA with just 1 line of code. Last row equals dot range. Remember, we don't need the sheet number because we've already defined it here. Okay, so we've already defined the sheet number 1, so we know which one we're talking about. So we'll use E, and then we'll just choose a large number. This would be the limit of our table. In this case, we'll just choose 99,999, and then dot end, and then XL up. That will give us our last row. Okay, so that line will set our last row. In this case, it's going to be 21, but your table may have different rows, so it's always nice in case you add rows. It's always nice to define the last row and make it dynamic and variable so that you don't have to worry about redoing your macro when you're adding data. So that's always a nice, although our data will stay the same. And now we really pretty much we want to set our fields up. So basically we want to start our filtering, and we have to define, okay, last name is going to be E5, right? But one thing we don't want to do is if this text says enter name, we don't want to filter it because that's just our default text. So basically we want to create that filter for anything other than text enter name. Okay, so we can go ahead and write that in a code. Okay, so we can do that if dot range E5 dot value equals enter name. Okay, then contact name, remember we've defined it up, that we've defined it as a string, and contact name equals empty. Okay, so that it's empty. That means it's going to, we don't want to give it a value. We want to make sure that we don't filter by the words enter name. That's perfect. And then we can do else. And if it's not, so that means if it's not enter name, then we can go ahead and define it. And contact name does equal whatever is in the value of range E5. So we'll go ahead and let's close that out so we get a little more space. Increase this so we can see dot range E5 dot value. Okay. Okay, great. Now we can go ahead and just mark that as contact name. And the next is going to be for the dates, and we'll do something a little bit different here, because if no from date is entered or no to date is entered, we do want to set an earliest and latest possible date. So that will be helpful. So what we'll go ahead and do, we'll say if dot range f5 dot value equals from date. In that case, if it's still from date, that means no from date has been entered. And then in that case, we want to set the FR date to equal, let's just say, the earliest possible date. That you could set this date to any date you wanted, but we'll go ahead and set it for January 1st, let's say 1900. This way, any dates after that will show up. So, and then else, if it's not from date, that means the user has entered a date, and in that case we want to set our from date to range F5. So FR date equals dot range and then F5. Okay, and then so we can set that to the value. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and mark that as the from date. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing to the to date. If dot range G5 dot value equals to date, then to date, and we'll go ahead and set a future date far in advance. We'll go January 1st, let's say 2030. And so that is well over anything within our table. Else to date equals dot range and then G5. And that sets our to date value. Okay. And then the last is the address. So we can do it, go ahead and write the code for that. If dot range, and then that would be I5 in that case. That is column I, value 5, value equals enter address, and in this case we can go back to the empty status. Then the contact address equals empty. Okay, else contact add equals dot range I5. Okay, so now we've written enough code for those particular filters to set the values. And now we're ready to write our filter code. And first we're going to select the table. So in this case it's going to be dot range. And then our table, we're going to start it off at that empty row, which is row 6. So our first column is E and then 6. And then our table goes to column O. So we'll set O. And then the last row is dynamic. So we'll close the quotation marks and click and last row. Okay, and then dot select, because we want to select that entire range. And then basically with that selection we're going to set our auto filter selection dot auto selection dot auto filter. Okay, and then with that range also we are going to go ahead and then set our filters. So we're going to say with that same range dot range E6 through O and then last row. And then what are we going to do with that? And we'll go ahead and write our end with. We spelled with wrong. We don't need an E there, do we now? Okay, so then with that we're going to say basically if contact name does not equal empty, then we do want to set the auto filter for that. Then dot auto filter. Okay, field 1, because that's column 1, field 1, okay, I'm sorry, field equals 1. The field is equal to 1, okay, and then the correct, that's field because it's column 1. This is going to be 1, this will be 2, 3, and then 4. So we'll use 4 for address, and we'll use 2 twice for the dates, okay. And so back into our code, we can do field 1, and then the criteria for that is going to be equals, and then we're going to put in the parentheses equals, and then the star, and I'll explain why we're entering that, then the star, and then and contact name, and then another and then another star. Okay, and the reason we enter the stars for this text is because we want to filter anything that includes our name. So for example, if we enter AV, right, it's going to show David, right? That means anything before and anything after. If you want to match the name exactly in our code, you will remove these stars both before and after, and it will only return exact matches. But in this case, I don't want exact matches. I want anything even close to that. So that's why we've gone ahead and written in the stars, and those are wildcards, and that's what those are used for. All right, and now we can enter the auto filter for our dates. So that would start out, and since we've already defined whether they're going to be missing any date or not, we don't need to write any if there. So we can just start out with the auto filter, and then we can put in, and this is going to be field 2 because it's the second column, field equals 2. Okay, and the criteria is going to be, we're going to have 2 criteria in this case. So criteria 1 is going to be equal to, and then in this case quotation marks, greater than or equal to, and the from date. Okay, that means the from date either on or after the from date, we want that to enter here. And of course the second operator, we also have a second criteria, so we'll need to enter an operator. In this case we'll call it operator, and then colon equals XL and, so basically and we also want an additional to the from date. In addition to the from date, we want a to date. So and criteria 2. Criteria 2 colon, and that is going to be equals, in this case, less than or equal to the to date. Less than or equals to the to date. And to date. Okay. So that is going to give us our both parameters for our from and our to date. Okay, and that'll cover us for the field 2. And the last is the enter address, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is the 5th column down. Okay, so the 5th column. So we want to make sure in this case we are entering field number 5. So we're going to go back to the if our contact address does not equal empty, then dot auto filter, and then field 5, okay, equals 5, and then the criteria, just one criteria in this case, criteria 1 equals, and then back, because we want to match any address even remotely before or after, so we don't want an exact match. So in this case it's equals star wildcard and contact ADD, and then in quotation marks the star again, just like we did for the contact name. And there we have it. That is our filter. Okay, so we can go ahead and take a look at that. Let me go ahead and take a look at the code here, and we will run the macro, and we see currently I've put in the appointment dates 17 and 18, so that's working well. We've got that from, and we can go ahead and manually clear that filter out, and we're going to add a button a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and enter AV as we had before, and then put in from date and then to date, and then go ahead and see how that filter looks. Okay. And all right, so that's working as well. As you can see, it wasn't a complete match, and that's exactly what we want. So we can go ahead and clear that filter as well. And okay, let's continue on with our filtering. Okay, that works great, but what I'd really like to do is I want to be able to clear that filter, and I want to put it back in our defaults. So I want to put in I want to put an enter name, from date, to date, and enter address. I want all that automatic when I clear the filter, so we can basically reset this table, and I want to do it through VBA so it's nice and easy for the user. So we can do that. We can set do that with a macro. So why don't we create that? Let's go ahead and create a sub clear filter. Okay, and again, we're only working with sheet 1, so let's enter with sheet 1. Okay, and the first thing we want to do is we want to clear that filter out, so we can write just one line of code with auto filter mode, and then we can do equals false, and that'll clear out the filter. Okay, but I also want to reset our names in these fields. Okay, these 4 fields, I'd like to reset it back to enter. So we can do that very simple with just a few lines of code, and dot range E5 dot value equals enter name, right? Dot range, and then we have F5 equals from date, right? And that was G5, and then G5 equal to date. And then the last one would be, I believe, enter address on the I5. I5 equals enter address. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. See if we got the code right. And we'll go ahead and just click in here and then run that code. And then, oh, we got a bug here. Value. Let's go ahead and fix that. Forgot to equal there. Okay, no problem. And go ahead and run that code again. And all right, that looks great. It ran. Let's just delete that and then run the code once again so we can see it in action. And they're good. Now it's replaced all that, and we've cleared the filter out. So now let's go ahead and take a look. Let's go ahead and put in a date, 8/21. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and run the code once again. Go ahead and run. This is the code, the filter code we're running. Okay, that looks nice. And then we're going to go ahead and clear the code. Great. Okay, but clearing the code, why don't we add a button for that? So let's go ahead and insert shapes. Okay, we'll use this oval shape here. And then we'll just go ahead and clear filter. We can add icons to that if you like. And then we'll go ahead and just style that up a little bit. So that it looks better. All right, make it look a little bit more like a button. Okay, now all we have to do is assign that clear filter macro button to that. So right click, assign macro or N, and then we only have 2 macros, so clear filter. Okay, now we've got that clear, so now when we click the button, clear filter. Okay, it's already cleared, so it's working. Well, that's great. Also, when we run that filter, when we run this filter, right, we see these things, these filter icons here, and you know that's nice for allowing Excel to manipulate, but I like hiding that. So I've included this in row 6. So what I'll do is I'll hide row 6, and so in our table filter, I'll usually write in dot range and then 6:6. And then I want to hide the entire row, entire row dot hidden equals true. Okay, I want to hide that row. So when I run that filter, okay, that's hidden, and it's just a nicer look, you know. And the last step basically of what we want to do is, now what we want to do is when we enter a name here, we want that filter to run, right? We're not going to go back into the macro and run that macro every time. We want it to run automatically when a user changes this. And we can do that through the sheet, okay? Double clicking on the sheet here, okay? And we want that macro to run when we make a change in any one of these 4 cells. So we can do that correctly by here. We'll go into the worksheet. And not selection change, not when we make a selection change, but when we make an actual change, okay? So we can remove this selection change. So when we make a change to these specific cells, we want that macro to run. So we can write some code like this, if not intersect, okay, and then target, comma, range, and then here we enter the cells, and in this case it's E5 through G5, E5 through G5, okay, and I5, okay, comma I5. So, and then close the parentheses twice, is nothing, then, okay, what do we want to do? And now what we want to do is we want to clear, we want to put in this table filter macro. So all we need to do is copy and paste this macro right in there. So go back into sheet 1, okay, and there, now it works. So now if there's any change, that macro is going to run. So we can do here, just double click here and then hit enter, and so now that filter runs automatically when we make a change. And now there's one additional thing we want to do. Watch what happens when we clear the filter. You get this flash. You see that flash? And what's happening is that filter is running automatically when we enter these names, because any change, right? Any change to these fields, that macro is going to run. But we don't want that macro to run when we're entering enter name. When we're clearing the filter, we don't want the macro to run, but it's running because it's entering these names here. So we can easily change that, okay? So what we need to do is we need to know when that macro is, let's go ahead and clear it. When the clear filter is running, we don't want it to run. So let's go ahead and enter clear filter. That's just a little note for us, and then just we can put in any value. So we don't need true, let's put in true, but it'll automatically. So basically what we're going to say is when we clear this filter, okay, we'll go down to clear filter, and now let's go ahead and set this temporary true or false when the filter is running. So dot range, okay, B4 dot value equals true. Okay, so this cell becomes true when we're clearing the filter. When we're clearing the filter, that cell becomes true, okay? And when we're finished clearing the filter, it goes back to false. Dot range B4 dot value equals false, okay? So that value is only true when we're clearing the filter. So now we can add another condition back onto sheet 1. We can say we want you to run these filters, right, if there's any change to these cells, and one more condition, and range B4 dot value equals false. So that basically what we're saying is, yes, go ahead and run this filter, but only if this value is false, only if, okay? So now we can clear the filter, and you see it went from, and now when we run the filter, John, okay, we run the filter and we've cleared the filter, and there's no more flash because and you can go ahead and hide these columns, and now you've got a nice table and you can run. Let's go ahead and say 1, 2. Okay, so only the addresses, that's working. And then we can do, let's say anything after the August 18th, 8/18. Great, that's working. And then we'll go ahead and write in Jimmy. So this allows for multiple, okay, and then clear the filter. All right, so that's working great. I hope you very much enjoyed this table header filter lesson. If you have any questions, comments, please let me know. Your likes and shares are always appreciated, and thank you so much. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and select the Send Me All Notifications options so that you can get our videos to you right away as soon as we create them.